I remember when the Cardinals were pushing for their new Busch Stadium to be built a decade ago. The question was whether public funds should go to help build it, not just work on the infrastructure around it, but actually to help build the stadium. And a guy by the name of Fred Lendecki led a coalition of people who said, no, taxpayer dollars should go to this without the taxpayers being asked about that. Well, by the time he was able to get that on a ballot, it was too late. The taxpayer dollars had already been dedicated for that cause. But they were, in 2002, able to get this law passed that has been on the books ever since that says you and I, as taxpayers, have a say in whether we're going to fund yet another stadium in our town. And this, of course, is a big issue now with the Rams threatening to go to Los Angeles unless they get a new stadium. That may not even be the threat. They may go regardless, but demanding that we have a new stadium because the Dome isn't good enough for them anymore. So that law has been on the books for years and years and years. But yesterday, a judge said that law was too vague to be enforced. David Hunn from STLtoday.com and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch has been on this story and joins us now. Hi, David.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Good. So this judge said too vague to be enforced, which means we don't get a vote?
Right. That is exactly what it means. He basically said it wasn't written correctly. It wasn't the law was not written in a way where you could actually enact it, is what the judge said.
So does this mean that the politicians in charge and Dave Peacock and the rest who are putting together this movement for Governor Nixon are going to be able to do this without any taxpayer input whatsoever?
Yeah, I hesitate because the city has committed to doing some sort of public hearing process. Just yesterday, when this all came out, the city is in an interesting spot. Remember, Mayor Francis Slay supports the new stadium, and yet he has said for a few years now that he would require a public vote for any new taxpayer dollars. So the city is saying that they're disappointed by the ruling from Frawley, intimating they would have wanted a vote. And to replace that, they're saying that they'll have public hearings and even ask the Board of Aldermen to consider a new law. Of course, that new law wouldn't happen fast enough to affect this stadium, but perhaps the hearings would.
When does the NFL start making their decision about whether they're going to stay in St. Louis or not, which is one thing that we need to know before we were to go forward and build a new stadium? What's the timeline there?
Yeah, well, that's the billion-dollar question, right?
Yep.
I think here's what we know. There's a meeting next week in August where the owners will get briefed by the teams themselves on the team's plans to move to Los Angeles. So the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Rams will talk for the first time in front of the ownership.
You're talking about this month?
Yeah.
Okay.
Next week on the 11th.
Wow.
So that is the first. That's the next meeting.
Okay.
Then there will also be a meeting in October, and that's their general membership meeting. So that's just a normal meeting where I'm sure they'll discuss this to some degree. It's unclear. So then there's another meeting on the books in December, and that's a special meeting. And this meeting in August is also a special meeting, so we're all kind of making the assumption that the December meeting may well be decision-making time. Now, that said, this ownership is a board, just like any other board, like any association or not like any, but it is a board that runs a company, a big organization, and they could make a decision anytime they want it. They're not bound by anything but their own bylaws. So, we don't really know. We don't know exactly when things could happen. We think they'll follow their own rules. We think they'll make a decision soonish. I'd expect something in December.
Okay, well then what's the timeline for the city of St. Louis and the Aldermanic Council to make their decision on whether we're even going to be able to vote on this? Because there's got to be a deadline for the November election.
So the indications that I got yesterday, Paul, was that that this is done, that it's over. That there is not going to be a serious effort to do
a public vote,
to get a vote going.
Okay.
Yeah, I know there are some aldermen who are very interested in the public vote. I doubt very seriously that there are enough aldermen That would take 15 on or more, depending on how it happens, depending on how quickly they wanted to move it through the board. The board's out on summer break for 2 months. So I just think it very unlikely, or at least a month, or I think it very unlikely that something will happen here. Mayor Slade's administration seemed, I hate to say this, but I think I would characterize them as a little defeated yesterday. They were very disappointed. They said they were very disappointed in Ferralli's ruling, and they seemed resigned to the fact that this meant, given the timeline by the NFL, that they could not get things together in time for a public vote.
So then who does get a vote?
I don't think that's entirely true, right? I think they could get it together in time, but it would take a huge Herculean effort.
Okay. So who does get a vote? Will the aldermen get to have their say on this, and who else gets any kind of input?
Yeah, again, that's a really good question, and one that I kind of look for every day as I work. It's because it's just unclear. Now, here's what we know, right? So from the city, so there's so many pots of money that are going into this, right?
Yep.
So the legislature has already fought that it should have a vote on the state's extension of bonds. So the state wants to extend its payments and refinance its bonds and get more money from its pot to put towards the new stadium. Legislature's already said, hey, we need a vote on this. But Nixon has really just kind of plowed ahead without paying much attention to that. So there's been a suit in Cole County on that behalf. I expect to hear a ruling on that soon. That might tell us if there needs to be a legislative vote. In the city, I think that the same might happen. I think it's possible that Mayor Slade's administration moves forward without an aldermanic vote. I'm not sure it's necessary. It might be.
Wow. And what about those of us who live in the county? We have no say in this because the county has said we're not putting up any more tax dollars for this, right?
Correct. So the county is out. What happened there was that Steve Stenger, the new county executive, newly elected, said he's going to require a vote either way. And at that point, Nixon pulled him out of the game. So the county's out of this process for now. I got to tell you, Paul, I'll be shocked if the county doesn't get back into it at some point. In fact, I haven't had a chance to talk to Dave Peacock, the governor's task force member, about this.
Yeah.
But he said yesterday that he's calling on the region to come together. I can't help but think that was at least a little directed at Steve Stenger in the county.
Of course, I would remind people who live in the county that when we say you won't have a vote on this and your tax dollars won't be involved, that's your county tax dollars. Your state tax dollars will still be involved unless the legislature
certainly will
gets in the way there. Now, there's one other thing in your piece this morning in the Post-Dispatch I've got to ask you about this, and that is the definition of the word adjacent. The judge seems to think there's a different definition of that word than I think there is.
Yeah, so the judge is saying he didn't spend a lot of time on this point. He almost seemed to dismiss it, fairly quickly. His point was that the courts have not used the term adjacent to mean touching throughout their history, and I just can't really speak to that. I certainly have not done a historical look at the word adjacent in Missouri court.
But the question here is whether the new riverfront stadium land qualifies as being part of the stadium authority, because it does if it is, quote, adjacent to the current stadium authority land, which is the dome and some small bit of real estate around that. But clearly, we're going across Highway 70 and into a different region. So he says adjacent doesn't mean touching. It just means nearby?
Nearby, right. I will say this, Paul. Chris Bauman, the attorney in Bob Blitz's firm, the Edward Jones Dome attorney and the task force member, right?
Yep.
So Chris Bauman is an associate or an attorney there in the firm. And he really did an authoritative job persuading the judge during the hearing, the hearing itself, that this new stadium land was coming so far south and coming so close up to the Edward Jones Dome. At the same time, the authority owns a piece of land right up next to that. So where they were coming down and really are only separated by that by the highway, by Highway 70, and otherwise they are pretty close.
Yeah, just a small street. It's only an interstate highway in between them. David Hunn. David Hunn covering this story relentlessly for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and STLtoday.com. Thanks for joining us this morning. 7:59 at the Big 550.